I'm Linda. You're Melissa, right?
Melissa. Hi.
Isn't this something?
Well, I can never keep track. You know the way she talks about her kids, like I ought to know who they are and how. Oh.
This is Melissa's house.
Yeah, it's right. They're really expensive. People that lived there before you.
It does, doesn't it?
What's the idea? Staffers in here, local staffers in this room, press.
Let me say, first of all, I really appreciate you being really expensive. Talks about this, but I want to, my background, our state is over half covered by forest land still. We have some of the same problems you do on the but not nearly as severe on the question of whether to clear cut in the national forest and how much. And we have timber sales tied up in court and those kinds of things that we've gone through here, so I'm somewhat familiar with that. But we have the virtue of being able to grow trees to full commercial length more quickly in just a little over 20 years. And so we have planted considerably more than we've cut for well over a decade now. And we're way up over that now. So it's not that we don't have anything like the degree of difficulty you're facing here, but I just wanted you to know at least that I've represented a lot of log haulers and mill owners and people who work in paper mills, and it's a very important part of our economy. It's central to any high-wage base we try to develop. And in the 1980s, when the economy was really tough, I tried to follow a balanced approach where we both provided an investment tax credit to the bigger companies to continually modernize plant and equipment and meet the environmental standards, and continue to raise the environmental standards so that we increased the number of manufacturing jobs in the state and tried to deal with the environmental issues at the same time. So I want to just tell you that by way of background. My view is that if we put this problem in the perspective of where we're choosing people or the forest we've lost before we start. So I just want to listen to you and you can educate me. How do you want to start, Peter?
I don't know. Teresa, why don't you start?
Well, I'm a single mother, and I've had to work full-time since I was 19. And I work for Georgia Pacific Hardwood Mill in Lebanon, Oregon. I'm very concerned about what's happening in my communities. Right now, I'm working full-time right now. I've experienced a lot of layoffs. They're just temporary, But this happens in a lot of timber towns now, but the experience of a layoff is very threatening to all of us because we never know if it's going to be a permanent or or if it is just temporary. In the two communities of which I live and work, we've had 8 permanent mill closures. We really can't withstand much more of that. It's devastating our communities. We depend on our timber sales for a great proportion to fund our schools and our roads. And I really feel that our children, and our teachers, and our communities are being cheated by the people that are trying to stop logging at all costs. I think that the people, along with the environment, must be considered. Whenever we ask a question or answer a question on forest management. I don't know, I think everybody here, some of us are displaced workers, some of us are like me, just on again, off again on our work. But we're very, very scared about what's happening out here in the Northwest.
First, Governor Clinton, I certainly appreciate the time that I know is very valuable to you to come out and get our side of the story for a change. I worked in the timber industry full-time for over 32 years. I'm a head sawyer, which is the person that actually cuts the logs into timber and so forth for Roseburg Forest Products in Roseburg and Douglas County. We have probably the most old growth left of any county in the nation and the most owls. I've been asked before, what has this done to your family and others? Well, I can relate to the people in Florida. Our people are losing their homes. Our people are losing their cars. Our people are losing everything they worked all their life for. I'm still working, but you don't know from day to day if you're going to continue to work. We do have a caravan of forest products headed for Florida, which will arrive tomorrow from the Pacific Northwest. When they had the earthquake in San Francisco, it was put on the front burner in our company that we cut 12 by 12, 20-foot long to shore up the people in San Francisco until they could get their feet under them again. We're needed here. We produce products for the nation. By tying up more and more and setting aside more and more, which we have a tremendous amount now, this leaves it open to wildfires and bug infestation. You do not have roads to fight these fires. Multiple use is what we have to strive for in order to keep our people working that are still working and get the ones that aren't back to work so we can continue to what we do best, and that's supply for the nation the wood products they need.
Ed, why don't you talk about your recent experience?
I've been in the timber industry about 20 years, and I've been in 2 different sawmills now. And I'm currently went back to work today for 1 week, but I'm supposed to be permanently laid off because of the price of little logs has gone up so high that they can't afford to buy them and run the mill, so they've shut it down. And I think I'm one of 30 people that were laid off, and I've been told we're not going to have a job. So I'm trying to get into this dislocated workers program, and I'm sure I'll get in, but they've got a backlog, and so I'm just waiting to do that. And I personally want to change fields now. I've done it for 20 years, and I don't have any faith in it anymore. There's too much politics and all this in it, so I've given up personally. But then hopefully I can go to school and do something else.
Well, I think leads into Frank and Glenn are pretty good. Go ahead.
Well, I was in the wood product for 21 years, and was laid off and decided to go to school and good education, and I did the best I could. I got an Associate of Applied Science degree with a major in welding technology, and I decided to start my own welding program, or actually it's a thermoplastic welding company, and it's, as far as I know, I'm the first person in Oregon to start one. And the schools decided to start teaching thermoplastic welding, and I'm going to help teach it at the school. And things are looking pretty good. I feel good about myself. And thanks to Peter DeFazio giving me a scholarship, helping me through the program that I was in. To run out of money, and I had a year left. And, well, thanks to Peter DeFazio, I was able to finish my education and get my degree and start this company up. And I was looking for a small business loan, and which is really hard to get. And it's been hard. It's been, you have no security, you know, when you're starting your own company, and it's all new, and it isn't as easy as people think. You know, besides learning plastics, you have to learn business. And you're coming from a plywood mill, it's a lot to learn. I'm doing the best I can now.
Glenna, do you want to supplement?
This is a thrill. It's a shock. I didn't know I was going to be here until I walked in the door. I was just going to take pictures, but they wanted my opinion on how it feels to be the wife of a dislocated worker. And after 21 years at the same mill, the same job, looking towards retirement, and then all of a sudden no health insurance anymore, no vacations, and I hadn't worked for 5 years. I didn't need to. He made good money. Our kids were grown. We had a nice home, and I like to garden and can, and all of a sudden I didn't get too down because I thought during the 6 months unemployment he'll find something else. The unemployment ran out. There was nothing. There was no money. We were, how do we save our home? And so I went out knocking on doors looking for a job, and after my parents and my family had all been in the restaurant business, and I was just a high school graduate. I had no education or training. So I go to Kelly Services, say, find me a job, I'm desperate. And the phone rings when I'm walking in the door the next morning. It was just like God was watching over us, because they said, can you be at the Emporium tomorrow morning on a 5-day temporary job? And I thought, well, that 5 days will give me, and now that's led into 3.5 years for me. My company has been wonderful. They've given me all kinds of recognition awards for things that I've done to find out how to save them money. I'm so grateful that they gave me a chance, and we're working hand in hand, that they really acknowledge everything wonderful I do for them. I am now a grandma. I thought I was retired for life, but I love my company so much that now that Frank started his own business, I'm going to continue working a few years until he's a rich enough man that he can afford that I'll retire. But I said I love my company, and they've stood behind me, and they know all about Frank. And I feel we're one of the really lucky ones, because we do have hope. I'm thrilled he's out of the mills. Even when he lost his job, all the talk was how dangerous it was all looking, and I said maybe it was a blessing in disguise. Maybe it was the best thing at the time, because then when the dislocated worker, after 1 year, didn't allow him to stay in anymore, then you come up with your scholarship. And this was the best thing that ever happened to us, because that gave him another year to stay in, and because of that, he learned about this plastic welding, and the school has hired him to teach this fall. So we're one of the real lucky ones that, from being devastated, trying, no education between either one of us, no money, and it looks like our lives might be, maybe, slowly, things are looking good for us. But I'm a thrilled wife that he's out of it before, like this young man here says, that he's just starting to think about the dislocated. Frank's 2 years ahead of him. We're through that, and we've started a new life. So I wanted to thank you personally, too, for helping us.
Ed, how long is the wait for the program?
I don't know. I called them 2.5 weeks after I sent in my application, and there is a backlog. There's a lot of people trying to get into this program, and I'm not desperate, so I'm not trying to push them, but I just was interested in how long it would take. But they really didn't have any answers for me that were specific.
Basically, they don't have any openings right now, there isn't enough funding.
See, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Mac, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I'd like to add something. I worked 37 years in the timber industry, long time in plywood. And the plywood mill shut down in '66, and I got a job in Springfield at Roseboro Lumber Company, not Roseboro. They've been in Springfield 52 years. They're a former Arkansas company. Came from Arkansas, bought timber up from the Kenzie River here. They started out with a big mill. They now have a large sawmill, small sawmill, Green Inn where they make veneer, plywood plant where they make plywood, and a laminated beam plant where I worked for the 22 years. I got involved in the union, finally became the financial secretary, and I've just retired from that a year ago. I'm still a trustee of the Western Council, so when they need something, they call me, and that's how we got here today. But this company that I worked for all those years, I signed up 220 of the guys that are working there in the union, and there's 100 guys that were there before that. I know those people. And here just last week, the company bought some timber up towards the coast. They were going to log it, and they found an owl nest close to it in federal timber. They are shutting them down from logging that timber. You know, the company can't buy federal timber anymore, so they're buying these private timber lots, and they've got some of their own timber yet. And that one little timber lot up there might not hurt them, but you go on and on and on to stop them when they got to buy private timber, and they will stop that mill from operating. And that's 350 people that I know personally. And I know the people in the company, and gosh, it'd just be a tragedy for them. And it's something that we don't need happening here in the valley. The mill's probably the largest employer in Springfield right now. There's warehouses down. They have a paper plant that hires a lot of people. They're not working too many people in Springfield. There's another plywood mill in town there, and they work about 200 people. And there's something else in Springfield, isn't it, Peter? So, anyhow, it'd be terrible to shut that mill down with these friends of mine over there.
Let me ask you something. How long has this industry been losing jobs?
Started losing jobs in the early 80s. Really.
And was that because of greater cuttings in the 70s or because of technology changes? What caused the beginning of the job loss?
Darryl, you
Man, yeah, that was in the early 80s and late 70s, real late 70s, was a recession, and the demand for lumber plummeted. So therefore, the sawmills shut down and plywood also. And certainly the recession has something to do with this now, due to the low housing starts in 90 and 91. But it's kept the price from getting critical because there's always a backlog of federal sales that the mills have, and now they're running out. And so when it does hit, and when all this lumber is needed now, price is going to be out of reach for the people that need to build houses, like our friends in Florida and the rest of the nation. But I think in my mind you might be getting around to automation.
How much does that have to do?
I like to talk about automation. I started, like I say, 32 years old, full-time. When I started, they burn up the bark and the edgings where the boards go through the edger, and created pollution, of course, smoke, wigwam burner. When the log goes through the bark, or now the bark goes to the powerhouse to provide power for the whole mill, plus we sell to the power companies. The sawdust goes into another whole plant that's created by automation. Particle board is made down there. Chips, of course, into pulp. We're getting probably 40% more out of a log now than we did when I first started. this is automation. Without automation, you can't compete in any business, and I'm sure you people know that as well as I do. So automation hasn't played the big role that a lot of people would like you to believe. Although it has cut some jobs in some areas, you've gained jobs and higher tech jobs in other areas, and whole new plants. You know, someone mentioned with the Max, you're working on glue lamp.
We, for years when I started there, we made a lot of big timbers, the roofs of big buildings and everything. They've gone and specializing in special beams they use in sell-through lumber yards. They 60-foot, 70-foot, where they just go in and if you want to buy a piece, you just cut it off the chainsaw. And they've done well enough there. Their plywood plant, they specialized for several years in quarter-inch AB plywood, which they became a major manufacturer in the nation in that there. And they're doing some other plywood now. The green end, they can peel 8, 9, or 10-foot logs, and they're putting almost $1 million into their lathe system this winter. This company has modernized over the 50 years they've been in business, kept going. They've been a good citizen there in Springfield, and they treated the people pretty good too. I enjoyed working there. I was on a good company, good people.
Frank, just, you know, we got an interesting range of folks here. I mean, you know, to see, I mean, Ed, you know, sort of on the edge, you know, you've made the transition, Teresa and Darrell struggling, and Max has got a good lifetime out of it. I guess, I mean, there's a couple of things I'd like to, I'd like to explore a little bit your, you know, your problem, because you're, you know, we've got a problem talking to Ed with the fact that we can't, you know, we can't get you in the program soon enough, and, you know, I mean, you're patient, that's good, but we want to get you in, and we've got to examine that. And Frank, you're talking a little bit about the problems getting your business up and going. I mean, what do you?
I need to get a loan, a small business loan. I found that's a lot harder than what I was told. You know, I was trying to get through LCC. They told me if I went to take small business classes, and so I paid and went and took the classes and found out that there's not much of a chance of getting a loan.
Why did they tell you that? That there wasn't much, why did they tell you there wasn't much chance?
Well, they just said the money is hard to come by, is what they told me, and it is hard to come by.
Have you established a market for your product? You haven't.
Well, I've only been in business for 2 months, and it's working out pretty good. It's been growing, but it kind of goes in waves. So 1 week you don't get too much, and then the week you do, it's more business than you can handle. So I think it's just going to take time, you know, especially educating the public on plastic things can be repaired now. You know, like motorcycle fenders or four-wheel fenders or RV plastic holding tanks. It's endless, really. I've repaired canoes and boogie boards and about everything you can think of, you know.
No ads here, Frank. That's not too far.
I like it.
High-tech plastics.
Let me ask you something. Now that you're out of this industry, but you know it's still important to families in Oregon and Washington and throughout the country. What are your general feelings about what we ought to do? You know, you have to have the federal government owns so much of this land, and right now, because there has been no resolution of it for 33 of the last 48 months, all the federal timber sales have been tied up in court. So you got the worst of all. In other words, you got a situation now that's worse than what anybody proposes to be done. In other words, you take the worst from the point of view of the most protective plan of the old growth forest, you know, from the point of view of the forest and the owls, we're worse off now than that because all these sales are all tied up in court. So since you're out of it and you're looking back on it, you're thinking ahead, you know, what this state ought to look like 10 years from now or 20 years from now. Just generally, if you're giving advice to Peter and to me about what kind of policies we ought to try to pursue, what would you say?
Well, I think they just need to create more jobs, and I really wouldn't know how to go about it other than what I'm doing now. I'm doing my best to, if this business of mine takes off, maybe I can put some people to work in this. But as far as, I was born and raised here, and I have a lot of friends here, and I made a lot of friends in school, and I really do care about them very much. And I care about Oregon a lot, the beauty of the country, and I don't like clear cutting, but I like jobs, and I guess it's going to be up to you to come up with a solution. I sure hope that we can work something out where we can all have a job, a good paying job, not $5 an hour. I mean, something that we can support our families by. The way it works now is, it takes a man and wife both to work to make $10 an hour anymore, and it's terrible not to have a future to look forward to, or not to have any medical insurance. And well, like my age, I shouldn't have to be. I've put in a hard lifetime work already. I feel like, and to have to start all over again, but it's been very beneficial to me. But as far as coming up with a solution,
I'd like to comment on that question, if I might. When you're elected president, I would like you to possibly start your timber somewhat early, so when Congress comes back in January, we can go full steam ahead on this. There is legislation that has been drafted by Labor, and Mr. DeFazio is a co-sponsor. In the House, it's the Forest and Family Protection Act, 2463. And in the Senate, it's the Federal Lands and Family Protection Act, 1156. As you notice in both bills, it's families and forests. And this legislation would create balance. It would set aside more land for the owl. It would open up logging so we could have a sustainable level of logging. And I do mean sustained levels, because we do know that we have to have a sustained level. It's federal law. And I do honestly believe that these two bills, well, it's one bill in the House and Senate, would give us the relief we do honestly need, and still give us the environment that we have to have. But some people have portrayed us throughout the nation as being environmentally poor people, drones of the timber industry, and things of this nature. We're environmentalists. We're all environmentalists here. But we're for sound environmental practices. I think we've gone to so much extreme, and it's gone to such a political football, and we're the ones getting kicked, that I don't know exactly what you can do to get this started unless you can help get some of these bills through.
I've got some ideas, but we have some people from the national as well as from the local press here, and since we do, I think it might be helpful if maybe, could you just take 2 minutes and summarize what the bill does?
So you want me to summarize?
Yeah.
There's a large number of bills pending before the Congress. Darrell referred to one. I've written my own, less of coin than others. But there's a number of factors in common. One is you set aside some additional old growth, as Darrell admitted needs to be done, to protect owls and a whole lot of other associated values. We're beginning to see problems fisheries and our salmon. So we set aside additional areas. We change our management practices on a large portion of the remaining land, but the key is we're going to manage in those other areas. And so you've got your reserves, you've got your managed areas, and they're going to be managed differently and more sensitively than in the past. And then the other components of the bill are, there's a very strong component, which in fact I sat down and worked with a lot of my friends in labor on. We're admitting that there's going to be displacement. There already has been, and there will be more. To get full funding and get a really robust worker assistance and retraining program going. We've got provisions in the bill to give us some assurance of revenues for our counties because we're so dependent, as you pointed out, Governor, you're well versed in this. More than half our land is owned by the federal government. We can't tax it in any other way. If we don't get some return or some revenue sharing from the federal government, since revenue sharing's gone away, we're in deep trouble with our schools and roads. So those, and then finally, I think that the final point, and all the bills, these are in common in almost all the bills. There's a difference over how much to set aside. Obviously, there are differences over each of these points, but these are in each of the bills. And the final point is that none of us are exactly sure what the solution is, including the scientists who have reviewed this. And what they're suggesting is this would be an interim program while we go further with an impartial scientific study and set long-term management goals and guidelines and revise all our forest and interior BLM plans. But these things are in common in all the bills, and if we could just move toward our commonalities instead of the divisions, we'll be getting somewhere.
Governor Clinton, I think that what the people of the Northwest are after is we need a balance, because we have to, it only makes sense to harvest our timber so that we can replant and we can regrow for future homes for our children and our grandchildren. It's really difficult when every time we turn around there's somebody trying to stop us from logging, and we're all being cheated, not just here in the Northwest, but it's raising the prices on everybody's houses from coast to coast. With a balance, which 2463 does for us, everybody can get on with their lives and feel more secure about what tomorrow is going to be.
Isn't that one of the keys, Grace, really is like, and I think Darrell is maybe one of the guys that said it to me coming out of the mill one day, is that we need some certainty here. We know things are going to change. We know harvest levels are going to come down, but we need to know where they're headed, where they're going to be, and we need some certainty, and we need a little bit of help. I mean, I think that's what I'm hearing from Teresa.
Let me just point out what I think a president's role ought to be in all this. I think, because the reason I said I thought we ought to have a summit after the election and come up here and get all the parties to sit down is that I think right now we got the worst of all worlds. You've got all the timber sales have been tied up in court for 33 months. That is the worst of all worlds. I mean, you can't get any worse than that. That's, no matter what your perspective is, that's wrong. That's not good for the environment, and it's terrible for the economy, and it's not right. The second thing that I have noticed is this is the president's job. Nobody else can do this job. But there's been widespread disagreement among the federal agencies. You got the Fish and Wildlife Service, you got the Bureau of Land Management, you got the Interior Department. Who else is involved up there?
Forest Service Department.
Forest Service, Agriculture, EPA. There ought to be the national government ought to have a position. They shouldn't be virtually suing one another. Everybody's working in the same government. That's another thing. You are entitled to know that there is a coherent, consistent position from the national government about how these lands are going to be handled. And then I think, I don't want to take credit for this phrase because I got it from Peter, but I want to go back to something you said. I think that our policy ought to be no net loss of jobs. That is, in the last 3.5 years, 46,000 jobs have been lost in the timber industry in the Pacific Northwest. If you take the second plan that came out of the so-called God Squad under the Lujan plan, they say it'll be another 17,000 jobs. So the issue is not so much will some jobs be lost? Yes, they will. The issue, it seems to me, is let's look at where we are with the forest. We can't do anything about what wasn't planted 10 or 20 or 30 years ago that should have been planted. We can't go back and redo history. And figure out what is the right thing to do for a long-term, sustainable forest so that you can keep people working at a steady level and preserve the necessary diversity to guarantee you a healthy forest, to do the things that everybody wants over the long run. And then when we figure that out, we ought to invest whatever it takes to try to recreate the economy here around that core decision. And let me just give you 2 or 3 examples. If you set aside some land, a lot of that's going to need to be restored. That'll create jobs if you hire people to do it and you train them properly. It's my understanding, this is something that's foreign to me because it's not an issue I face at home, but that a lot of the sawmills in this state and in Washington are not geared to cut second growth trees. They just basically are structured for the old growth forest. There's we spend $100 million a year, more or less, in subsidizing the exports of raw logs out of the Pacific Northwest. And if we spent half of that, just think of this, giving investment credits, tax credits, to mills to retool, to the timber companies to add value to product here in America, to put even more people to work in the diversity that you were talking about, to provide for full funding of the worker retraining program so that people like you would not be told there's a waiting list. I mean, if national policy puts you out of a job, national policy ought to put you back in one. That's my theory. I mean, I think, in other words, if we make a decision that we simply can't sustain 1980 levels yields, that they have to, but we want a constant yield so everybody can predict it, then we ought to have a reinvestment policy in you that guarantees you that. And then there ought to be some access to capital for people to start small business. These are the kinds of things, it seems to me, that would bring some stability and predictability back into people's lives. I mean, I think, you know, the one thing that I can't promise you to do, I can't promise to make things the way they once were. If we're not going back to that, we're living in a world where the average 18-year-old is going to change the nature of the job 8 times in a lifetime, even if they stay with the same company, because of the diversity. But what's happened is because we haven't thought this through, not just in timber, but in the economy generally, most Americans today are working harder for less money than they were making 10 years ago. Almost all the growth in wealth in America in the 1980s was from the second person in the home going to work, or from people working longer hours. And we simply can't continue on this path where we let people stay out of work 6-8 months, and then when they do get a job, they're making $5 or $6 an hour, where once they made 15. And that's what I want to turn around. And I think, so I guess what I'm telling you is, I think the reason I call for this summit on the forest issue up here is that I think we've got to decide what the national government's position is between all these different bureaucracies. We've got to get the timber that ought to be cut out of court. We've got to get this issue out of court. And it's not just the Endangered Species Act. There are all kinds of other acts. The national law, Peter and I were talking about the national law that governs overall management of the forest, is more responsible than the Endangered Species Act for tying a lot of these tracks up. And then we've got to have a no-net job loss policy. We've got to say, if we lose jobs in the mills, we lose jobs in the woods, we're going to put people back to work either rebuilding the forest or in incentives to retool the mills or adding value to the timber here at home or training them fully, completely to go back to work. And in the meantime, we're going to have to take account of the loss of money to state and local governments and the school districts. Because all this, again, I would say, is a product of national policy. If the national government does something to you, there ought to be some obligation on the national government to have a no-net loss of jobs and let people make a living and go on. So that's just in general outline kind of where I think we ought to go. I don't think that the way this dilemma, the way this thing has been presented, you know, is the jobs versus the owls. If that's the dilemma, nobody can, you never win that argument. In other words, we'd cut out every tree if you want to. You could clear the whole forest in 5 years and put everybody to work. You'd have a negative unemployment rate in Oregon. And then you'd be back worse off than you were in the beginning. So what we have to do is to make the best decision we can about what a sustainable yield is, to go back. What is a reasonable, sustainable yield that preserves the genuine forest health? And I really want to take it out of this political impasse. I mean, I hate that this has been bad for everybody, what's gone on the last 3.5 years. We ought to take the best scientific data we have for what constitutes overall forest health and a sustainable yield, go after it, pursue it, put the people back to work in the forest and in the mills that are going to be able to get there once you get this out of court, and do something with all the other communities and all the other people to help them go forward. But I do think there is a pot of money there that Congress has. And I know it's somewhat controversial, but we spend $100 million a year subsidizing the exports of raw logs, and we ought to take, you know, a good chunk of that and subsidize the people in the Pacific Northwest, get them in a position to add value to those logs here, or to modify the mills, or to do some other work. That's what I think.
I've already got the bill drafted now. Look for your.
Could I respond to some
Yeah.
of your statements, Governor? It's true that there has been logs exported in the past off of federal and state lands in Oregon, and there's still some being exported off of state lands in Washington, which of course finance some of their schools. I believe 25%, and this is fine. And as a worker, I certainly don't want raw logs, even off of private lands, to be exported. But we must realize that most of the logs being exported now, all of them in Oregon, are off of private lands. And Peter has been trying to come up with something that's palatable so that we don't say, you cannot do this. Everybody always looks at the big companies that export, but sometimes we don't realize that, like in Oregon, there's 25,000 small woodlot owners. So if we can keep the logs here, it's going to be fine. And one thing, this problem is already starting to dissolve itself because the cost of timber is so high. Even our company has bought some logs that were earmarked for export, that were private logs. But one thing also is happening now is that private companies' timber is being tied up so severely. Our company, the company I work for, was buying from Weyerhaeuser. Now they don't have enough logs to supply us because they have to use what they have, which is about half from what I understand, that isn't tied up with owls to supply their own mills, the ones they have left. I've talked retooling. I'd like to hit on this a minute, Peter, if you don't mind. I'm not trying to take up the
No,
time.
I just want to, I got something on the export.
Okay, I'll shorten this up so you can come back. Retooling, we have. The industry, the ones that haven't, aren't running. We've got a small log mill capable of producing hundreds of thousands of board feet per day. It's down. We're cutting medium-sized logs, and we have been cutting second growth timber for years and years and years and years. We cut well over 50%, well, it's higher than that now, of second growth timber. There has been a lot of replanting. People don't realize this across the nation. They think that once it's cut, it's done and gone, and there you go. And we know in Arkansas that there isn't any old growth. Correct me if I'm wrong. And you're fighting the red-headed woodpecker or something back there. But we are retooling. We're getting more out of the logs, and I think the question being is, how much land do we really have to lock up? The more you lock up, the harder it is to sustain any kind of a cut. Peter, go ahead. I'm sorry, I rattle on.
Just 2 points. One is the governor's, he's a real quick study, and he's on to something that most people in the Northwest and around the nation don't even know about. The $100 million he's talking about is a subsidy that comes through the tax system to actually encourage the export of logs. We have a tax code now, which actually...
On private, yeah, I'm not for stopping people from doing it.
Right.
My question is, I don't think we should, it's their land, they ought to have the right to sell their logs to whomever wants to buy it. I'm against any kind of, I'm not talking about that. But there is a federal program, actual tax subsidy for the export of raw logs. And the point I'm trying to make is, and it goes to the private landowners on private land. The point I'm trying to make is, if we're doing that, shouldn't we now look at spending some of that tax subsidy to help them modernize and diversify and add to the value of the logs here at home? Shouldn't we subsidize different behavior that will maintain the job base better? That's the only thing I'm saying. No, I think it's their trees. If they want to sell them overseas, they ought to be able to.
I didn't realize it.
Yeah, a lot of people know. Pete Stark from California uncovered this in the GAO report. It's pretty recent information. Oh, I see. Yeah.
And it's interesting because I'm basically a big supporter of export programs. You know, my state couldn't survive without the farm export program. And I don't, so I don't think that there was any evil intent behind this program. I think this was a good thing to help America export its natural resources. But since we're spending so much on this now, and the point I'm trying to make is, if we divert some of this money to help to rebuild a new and different and more labor-intensive value-added timber economy in the Pacific Northwest, it might be a better expenditure of the taxpayer dollar. Or if we diverted some of it to help make sure this man doesn't have to wait too long to get retrained. But see, everybody else loses. If you're out of work for a year, it costs everybody else money. I mean,
Right.
I mean,
You
it's-
can't pay your taxes when you're not. Well, Governor, I really, on behalf of the people of the 4th District of Oregon and the small representative group we've got today and who come from the industry that's impacted, I want to thank you for taking time in the middle of a very tough campaign to sit down with us, sit down with me on the plane, and to hear a bit, and also to fulfill that promise you made during the town hall. I try and fulfill all the promises I make during town halls too, but you know, sometimes you get yourself a little bit oversubscribed, and I really appreciate the fact that you made the time to come today, and I think it's significant.
I just want to say, first of all, I want to thank you. I've learned a lot just listening to your stories, and they're important. And again, let me say, if I win this race in 50 odd days, I am determined to break this logjam. I don't want to. You're entitled at least to have all these federal government agencies on the same side, to have a coherent policy, and to have a commitment to your region and to the people here that resolves this in a fair and balanced way. I think we can do it. And all I can tell you is this is not just an election year deal with me. I mean, I guess maybe it's because I've been a governor. I couldn't let anything fester this long and survive. I couldn't do my business that way. And so we can all argue around the edges of this problem, how much you set aside and how much you do that. But what we desperately need is a resolution of it. Oregon needs it, Washington needs it, the whole Pacific Northwest needs it. And I can assure you that I'll remember what you all said to me. I won't forget. And thank you, host.
Yeah, well, thank you for
You're
coming
right,
to
Bob.
business.
Thank you.
Glad to have you here in the area.
You plant this tree too?
Yes, that's a linden tree. Has leaves about 4 foot big sometimes. Trimmed it up a little bit to get some light in it.
And this one you planted?
That's a cedar tree.
Yeah.
That was redwood in the next yard. Everybody's got a lot of trees. Nice neighborhood. Some awful good friends on each side of me. Wife and I let the yard go and brought plants over. Helped decorate it a little bit. Helped with a lot of stuff.
It looks nice to me.
We let the press car in the lot next door. We got the lights up on the shed and everything. I want to thank all my neighbors. They've been really a big help to us.
Thank you very much.
What do you want to do? You want to go back to the wireless?
Go back to wireless. As soon as you plug it in, there it is.
You're over much. You know, he's saying something.
think, yeah, a big issue about what to do with trash and waste will be resolved. Because we have it in our county. Georgia City is involved. And then they started clear cutting it because they bought that kind of way. Not the whole big warehouse. How big is it? They were all big. And what they tried to do is not only increase buying in the trash, we now already started. Oh, yeah. But it's so much more simple than so we don't have old workers. We have a lot of regulatory trust. We've got a lot of
You can't do that, yeah, but
get it on there.
Sure. Hey, Frank.
Get everybody on there. Where's hey, Bob? Where are you? Come on, let's let Bob take the first photo. I'm looking for on an overall.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah, maybe I should go back again, Frank. Maybe I can do better. Concentration's a little better, huh? I know I think a lot more than I used to. I think a lot more than what I used to. I try to use my head more than I used to.
It is amazing. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Glad to have you.
One of the good things that came out of the much acclaimed energy district in Carter's president is the vision that was prior to the buy back excess power generated. Their business. It was a real process for giving an economic incentive for the timber industry all across the wood production. All especially to do that. And it is, in the aggregate, now accounts for quite a significant amount of electricity generation. And now that all these power plants are integrated, like the telephone grid, you can see these kind of markets for sure. There would be a lot of it because it's just about done. That's not how it happens. It'll change the action. But if you had a big surplus up here and we had a shortage, we would just take the grids and they'd dump all the power all the way down from power company to power company. But the net would be, I would say, it would be a combination of the But what that means is that if we do this right and continue to do it, have incentives for companies to generate their own energy, then we're going to have much less demand for the power diverted capital it's really a big deal. Quaker, I went to Quaker Civil Rights Valley the other day. They now take the boat and they make chemical out of it. They make ethanol out of it. They make a chemical out of it that's used. This is brought out the same ocean. They make a chemical out of it that's wastewater. It's much cheaper than municipal wastewater treatment. It's dramatically lower cost. Then what's left is like sewer and oil. Mix that with coal. So they made a whole mess of jobs for people out of the county. Fuzzy mics, they can hear us 2 blocks away. They were carrying one of those fuzzy mics in Chicago one day, 2 blocks from me, and I was running down the street, and they followed me running for 30 minutes, and I said, why are they still following me? They just want to see if I'm going to drop dead. And they said, no, we don't want that. Well, all right. Well, let me tell you what, I think we deal with general position. Say something about it. I believe it's specific. I believe it's what you would like to, I think there's no question is look at the whole span of
How many tape trouble? Tape trouble, I need tape.
But I do think that no matter what, we've got to recognize the fact that we're going to force like that over there. We've got to set a most system that deals with the job losses that come, so that there's use this phrase, no net job. But to whatever extent you create another diversified economy for Oregon, then everybody's going to be better off over long.
Lujan and all these people, I want to think there's an underlying principle for the resolution of this issue. And
Well, I think I think people are going to be hurt. There are jobs going to be lost, no matter which alternative is adopted. So it is very important how much you put into local training, community building, diversification of economy, and how much the federal government is willing to do. Not just to stop people from doing things, but to start with. If they want to rebuild some of these forests, they should like to do it. And we're rebuilding the forest, and it's set aside.
How long would it be before it
I think what you should, if we can, Congress will adopt a real economic revitalization plan that gives real incentives to businesses and individuals to reinvest in small business. Stop spending defense cuts on let's do a dollar-for-dollar transfer of defense cuts and things like new road building projects, new road projects, new environmental cleanup, go clean up a lot of these environmental grounds, stuff like that. But if you had it, then I think it could be a matter of a few months to really see if the things started moving. But we've also got to keep interest rates down. We've got to keep our allies going. What I was afraid of is that a lot of these countries would run off and leave us because their deficit is so big and in fact we want to do anything more investment. I think you can do it in another few months. You know as well as I do, look, the way you create jobs is what you're trying to do. You've got to go to somebody, they give you some money, you put it into people to work, and they'll make a living. Somebody buys what they need to do. That's what you got to do. You're great. Thanks. Thank you. Yeah, appreciate you did. Thanks. You're great. We give him one? Yes, I'll give Daryl one.
2:45 I get out.
Are you Democrat?
But I always voted.
I almost went down. I'm glad I did.
For one thing, as a union officer, I've been financial secretary in my local, vice president of the Valley Board of
And got pushed. Okay,
Yeah, I'll only ask you a couple. And if anyone else comes over,
this is my neighbor.
I will. She has some nice things to say about you guys. We talked to her beforehand. TV does that to you. Yeah. So tell me, what was your first? Do you think what he said is just campaign rhetoric? Or do you think it's I think it's what were some of the things that he said?
They're going to be filming what other ones are Americans. Yeah, everybody.
Oh, so we could always find somebody. The other people back there were also felt like it was a positive experience. Was there anybody that kind of walked away feeling negative?
So just switch it back and forth.
Did you get a chance to ask him?
No, well, I just
What would be the message you hope he walks away with?
I can think of.
But I mean, from Oregon. If he leaves with one thought from Oregon, what do you hope it is? Thanks. Okay.
Here's another one. Just, if you look around, you're going to find some more.
Show us your pizza boxes.